In this video, we are going to check out an awesome game played in the Tata Steel Masters 2022 in the round number 2 between Magnus Carlsen, the world champion, versus Anish Giri, one and all favorite. And this game is so interesting that I think everyone watching this video is going to simply love this game. This game is so awesome that I just can't explain it in the words. Yeah, just watch this game. Okay, so let's check it out this game very fast. So, Magnus Carlsen with the white pieces started out the game with 1d4, knight f6, and soon we land in the queen's gambit decline position. And after d5, in this position white is already having many options. White can either go for playing knight to c3, white is having an option to go for the Slav, even bishop to g5 or even e3. There are many options, but Magnus Carlsen chose to play the Catalan variation in the g3 variation. Very famous. Bishop e7, bishop g2, castle, castle, and now we have d into c4. All those who don't know the line of Catalan, I must tell them that it is a very strategic sacrifice of a pawn, where okay, eventually white regains that pawn on c4 by playing queen c2, even knight d2, even knight a3, going for the pawn on c4. There are many ways to get this pawn on c4, and in the exchange, the bishop on g2 is very powerful looking at the rook on a8. So this is a very good idea. If you play the queen's gambit, then I must recommend you this line to play the Catalan. So after d into c4, Magnus decided to play knight to a3, going for the pawn on c4. And here Anish Giri captured the knight with the bishop. Pawn takes. And in this position, what is happening is, first of all, white is having the double pawn on the a file. White is the pawn down. But in the exchange, white got this two open files on the B and the C, which I think, and also in the exchange, white is much ahead in the development, whereas you can see black pieces are just all cornered up. So after B into A3, bishop to D7 by Anish, A4, a very nice move by Magnus. The idea of playing a4 is to make a square for the bishop to go on a3, which would be the best square for the bishop. Bishop to c6. So this was the idea of Anish. Basically, now by putting the bishop on c6, now if white tries to move the knight from the f3 square, black can simply go for capturing the bishop on g2, which is the key bishop for the white. Bishop to a3, rook to e8, and now we have queen to c2. Going for the pawn on c4. Knight to d7, and in this position you can't simply go for capturing the pawn on c4 because after knight b6 you are forced to move the queen and you lose the pawn on a4. So Magnus decided to double up on the c file. a6. In this position there are already many options. Black can even go for playing a6, a5, even rook c8. But playing knight b6 is not a good idea because we simply have a5. Knight is forced to go back and you can simply go for capturing the pawn. So a6 by Anish, and now we have finally queen into c4 capturing the pawn. Knight b6, queen c3, and now we have knight into a4. White is forced to give up a pawn on the a4 because or else you can't go for capturing the pawn on c4. So after knight into a4, black is still a pawn up because black went for capturing the a4 pawn for the pawn on c4. But in the exchange, white is fully activated his pieces. Whereas I think it's already very hard for black to continue this position because the knight on a4 is, for now it's good because it is attacking the queen. But here we have queen to b3. Now the knight is having no square to go. He have to go back to b6, which is going to take time. And I think white is already slightly better in this position according to me. Queen to d5. So Anish's idea is that he's a pawn up. So in the end game, he's already going to have an advantage. So he wants to trade the queens, which is a nice practical choice. But now's the moment. Feel free to pause the video and try to find the brilliant calculation done by Magnus Carlsen. This calculation is so tremendous that I think every player should try to find this answer. This calculation actually consists of many lines actually. And you can say that the rough calculation is around like 3 to 4 moves. So feel free to pause the video and try to find the move. Okay, all those who have found this tremendous move, rook into c6, going for an exchange sacrifice. Awesome. First of all, after rook into c6, basically white is planning to give an exchange sacrifice for the rook for the bishop. In this position, the queen cannot be traded because after ab3, if black tries to capture the rook, I'm going to capture the knight, and in this position, basically what is happening is, it is basically 2 minor pieces for a rook, which is already winning for white. Capturing the queen doesn't make any sense, and you can't go for capturing the rook with the pawn because the knight is hanging on a4. So black is forced to capture the rook with the queen, and now we have knight e5, hitting the queen with the bishop and the knight, and even there is a large amount of pressure on the b7 pawn. And in this position, black is forced to play queen b5 to protect the knight on a4, or else you can't play something like queen b6 because the knight is hanging on a4. So queen b5 is forced, and this is actually the critical move. In this position, when we try to calculate in this position, we think like, okay, after queen b5, there is nothing happening. You are forced to trade the queens, and okay, black is better. But white simply plays queen to c2. It looks like easy move, but if you try to do calculation, it's already very hard to find. The idea of playing queen c2 is to, first of all, not trading the queens. Second idea is to play rook to b1, hitting the queen and putting pressure on the knight on a4, as well as putting a large amount of pressure on b7. So sacrificing a rook for the bishop, I think, was a great deal for Magnus. Knight d5. And okay, knight d5, the idea of playing knight d5 in this position was to limit the bishop on g2, because now the bishop is no longer putting pressure on the pawn on b7, which was a nice move. Rook to b1, and now we have queen to a5. Fourth move, you can't play something, you can't play anything else because the knight is hanging on a4, and I think there is no other square for the queen. So queen a5, and now we have bishop into d5. So basically, many of you were thinking that why Magnus simply exchanged a powerful bishop for the knight on d5. The idea of capturing the knight was actually very deep, calculated by Magnus Carlsen. First of all, you can't capture the bishop with the queen because the knight is hanging on a4. So here's my second question. Feel free to pause the video and try to find the best move for black in this position. This move was missed by Anish Giri. Okay, so I think you must have a great deep thought, and all those who came up with the move e into d5, this was played by Anish Giri, which turned out to be the bad move. But the good move and the best move for black in this position is to play knight to c3, which is actually so hard to find, because after playing bishop into d5, it looks like the bishop is already very powerful, so it's better to capture the bishop, which was a nice practical choice. But the best move is to play knight to c3. The idea is to hit the bishop, hit the rook, and hit the another bishop on a3. In this position, white plays bishop to b4, hitting the knight and the queen, the most natural, and here black captures the pawn on e2, giving a check. Queen takes, and now finally queen into d5. So what is basically happening in this position is, it is rook versus knight and the bishop, but in the exchange, white is having 5 pawns and black is having 7 pawns. So basically, I think it's a very nice deal for Anish Giri. Yeah, he's having a nice pawn chain, so I think he can continue this game very nicely, although white is having a slight advantage. But already finding knight to c3, and after bishop b4, finding knight into e2 is extremely hard. So he went for his intuition by capturing the bishop on d5, which is a nice practical choice and the only choice. And here we have rook into b7, calculated by Magnus Carlsen. c5. At the place of playing c5, knight to c3 was a much more accurate move, because here comes bishop b4, hitting the queen and the knight. Queen into a2, queen into c3, sacrificing a piece, but in the exchange, queen b1 check, king g2, queen check, knight to f3, rook c8, and in this position, if you go for capturing the pawn, after rook trade, g5, g4 is already very deadly, h3, and now we have h5. So black idea is already very strong to play g4, although white is still better after queen to c1. But I think it would have been a much better position for black at the place of the position which landed in the game. We have c5 by Anish, and here Magnus came up with an excellent move. Queen to f5, simply idea is to capture the pawn, followed by queen g7, game over, checkmate. Black is forced to play rook f8, protecting the pawn. We have knight into f7, and now there are deadly moves coming up like knight to h6 check already. So Anish tried to find an incredible move, queen to d8. The idea of playing queen d8 is to basically sacrificing the queen. But capturing the queen has turned out to be a blunder, because here we have rook into f5. The knight is attacked, so the knight is forced to move. And here we have rook f7 for asking for a rook trade. Knight e7 check, rook into e7, rook into e7. And after c4, white is a pawn up, but black is at least black is having a playable position. But okay, Magnus is not going to blunder like this, completely winning position. He simply went for capturing the pawn on c5. We have queen f6 asking for a queen trade, and Magnus simply happily traded the queens because he simply calculated every line. He simply gave a check, king is forced to go on h8, and he simply tried to push the pawn. So basically what is happening in this position is, white is having 6 pawns, and black is having 4 pawns. And white is basically an exchange down, but the c6 pawn is already very powerful. Rook c8, c7, knight to c3, bishop to b2, d4. In this position, capturing the knight is blunder because after d3, this pawn is already very powerful. It's already winning for black. We have simply checked by Magnus, king to g7, and after knight to d6, then rook is attacked. So we have king g6, and Magnus doesn't go for capturing the rook, but he first played king to f1, defending the pawn. Knight to b5, asking for a knight trade, but Magnus goes for capturing the rook. Rook into a4, knight into c7, bishop into d4, knight to e6, bishop to e3, and on the move number 36 already, Anish Giri, after playing bishop to e3, decided to resign. Magnus Carlsen, after playing bishop to e3, Anish Giri with the black pieces decided to resign the position, and we have the winner of the game, Magnus Carlsen. There are many thoughts in the players' minds watching the viewers, like why Anish Giri decided to resign in this position, although he's a 2 pawn down. The reason Anish Giri decided to resign in this position was, first of all, he's a 2 pawn down, obviously, and second, there is no play for black actually, because the white bishop is already covering all squares from the knight. Second, white ideas to simply play rook b6, hitting the knight and the pawn, and there is actually no play for the black. So he decided to resign the position. A fantastic game, I must say, played by Magnus Carlsen. He actually simply showed his level. The critical moment, I think, landed in the position was queen d5. And after queen d5, the way he sacrificed the rook for the bishop, and after sacrificing, I think he simply knows how to coordinate his pieces, and he simply crushed Anish Giri, I think I should say. A fantastic game played by Magnus Carlsen, and I think if you were able to find the critical 2 moves, first looking at this rook into c6, and after that trying to look this bishop into d5 deadly idea. If you were able to find these 2 moves, I must congratulate you. And first of all, if you like this game, then make sure to like the video at least, and make sure to share this video with everyone, because I think this game was simply phenomenal, played by Magnus Carlsen. So I'm going to come up with these interesting videos for you. So if you are new to my channel, then make sure to subscribe to the channel, because I'm going to come up with these interesting videos like this. So till then, stay tuned and keep watching OneShot Chess.